busy basking in her status in camp, to bother with such a seemingly trivial event. Beside her was Swan. The former Amerlin had latched herself onto Lelaine with the strength of a barnacle. Ramonda was well enough pleased with the newfound ability to heal a stilling. She was yellow, after all, but a part of her wished it hadn't happened to Swan. Ramonda had not forgotten Swan's crafty nature, even if so many others in camp seemed to have done so. Lesser strength in the power did not mean decreased capacity for scheming. Shiriam was there, of course. The red-haired keeper sat beside Lelaine. Shiriam had been withdrawn lately and barely maintained the dignity of an Aes Sedai. Foolish woman. She needed to be removed from her place. Everyone could see that. If Egwene ever returned, and Ramonda prayed that she did, if only because it would upset Lelaine's plans, then there would be an opportunity. A new keeper. The other person in the tent was Magla. Ramonda and Lelaine had argued, with control, of course, over who would be the first to interrogate Shimmerin. They'd decided that the only fair way was to do it together. Because Shimmerin was yellow, Ramonda had been able to call the meeting in her own tent. It had been a shock when Lelaine had shown up with not just Swan, but Shiriam in tow. But they'd never said how many attendants they could bring. And so Ramonda was left with only Magla. The thick-shouldered woman sat beside Ramonda, listening quietly to the confession. Should Ramonda have sent for someone else? It would have looked very obvious, delaying the meeting for that. It wasn't really an interrogation, however. Shimmerin spoke freely without resisting questions. She sat on a small stool before them. She'd refused a cushion for it. Ramonda had rarely seen a woman as determined to punish herself as this poor child. Not a child, Ramonda thought. A full Aes Sedai, whatever she says. Burn you, Elida, for turning one of us into this. Shimmerin had been yellow. Burn it, she was yellow. She'd been talking to them for the better part of an hour now, answering questions about the status of the White Tower. Swan had been the first to ask how the woman had come to escape. Please forgive me for seeking work in the camp without coming to you, Aes Sedai, Shimmerin said, head bowed. But I have fled the tower against the law. As an accepted leaving without permission, I am a runaway. I knew I would be punished if discovered. I have stayed in this area because it is so familiar, and I cannot let it go. When your army came, I saw a chance for work, and I took it. But please do not force me to go back. I will not be a danger. I will seek a life as a normal woman, careful not to use my abilities. You are Aes Sedai, Ramonda said, trying to keep the edge out of her voice. This woman's attitude lent much credence to the things Egwene said about Elida's power-hungry reign in the tower. No matter what Elida says. Shimmerin just shook her head. Light! She never had been the most poised of Aes Sedai, but it was shocking to see her fallen so far. Tell me about this water gate, Swan said, leaning forward in her chair. Where could we find it? On the southwestern side of the city, Aes Sedai, Shimmerin said. About 5 minutes' walk eastward from where the ancient statues of Elaine al-Landarin and her warders stand. She hesitated, suddenly seeming anxious. It is a small gate. You couldn't take an army through it. I only know of it because I have the duty of caring for the beggars who live there. I want a map anyway, Swan said. Then she glanced at Lelaine. At least I think we should have one. It is a wise idea, Lelaine said, in a nauseatingly magnanimous tone. I do want to know more of your situation, Magla said. How is it Elida could think that demoting his sister was wise? Egwene did speak of this event, and I did find it incredible then too. What was Elida's thought? I cannot speak for the Amerlin's thought, Shimmerin said. She cringed as the women in the room gave her a set of not-so-subtle glares at calling Elida the Amerlin. Ramonda didn't join in. Something small was creeping beneath the canvas floor of the tent, moving from one corner toward the center of the room. Light. Was that a mouse? No, it was too small. Perhaps a cricket. She shifted uncomfortably. But surely you did do something to earn her ire, Magla said. Something worthy of such treatment. I, Chimarin said. She kept glancing at Swan for some reason. Fool woman. Romanda almost thought Elida had made the right move. Chimarin should never have been given the shawl. Of course, demoting her to accept it was no way to handle the situation either. The Amerlin couldn't be given that much power. Yes, that was definitely something under the canvas, determinedly pushing its way to the center of the tent. A tiny lump, moving in jerks and starts. I was weak before her, Chimarin finally said. We were speaking of events in the world. I could not stomach them. I did not show poise befitting an Aes Sedai. That's it? Lelaine asked. You didn't plot against her? You didn't contradict her? Chimarin shook her head. I was loyal. I find that hard to believe, Lelaine said. I believe her, Swan said dryly. Chimarin showed well enough she was in Elida's pocket on several occasions. This do be a dangerous precedent, Magla noted. Burn my soul, but it do. Yes, Romanda agreed, watching the canvas-covered whatever it was inch along before her. I suspect she used poor Chimarin as an example, acclimating the White Tower to the concept of demotion. That will let her use it on those who are actually her enemies. The conversation hit a lull. The sitters who supported Egwene would likely head the list of those to be demoted if Elida retained her power and the Aes Sedai reconciled. Is that a mouse? Swan asked, looking down. It's too small, Romanda said, and it's not important. Small? Lelaine said, leaning down. Romanda frowned, glancing at the spot again. It did seem to have grown larger. In fact, the bump jerked suddenly, pushing upward. The canvas floor split, and a thick-bodied cockroach as wide as a fig scrambled through. Romanda pulled back in revulsion. The roach skittered across the canvas, antennae twitching. Swan took off her shoe to swat it. But the bottom of the tent bubbled up near the rip, and a second cockroach climbed through, then a third, and then a wave of them, pouring through the split like too hot tea sprayed from a mouth. A black and brown carpet of scrambling, scratching, scurrying creatures, pushing over one another in their hurry to get out. The women screeched in revulsion, throwing back stools and chairs as they stood. Warders were in the room a moment later. Broad-shouldered Rorik bonded to Magla, and that coppery-skinned stone of a man was Barin Sheerin, bonded to Lelaine. They had swords drawn at the screams, but the cockroaches seemed to stump them. They stood, staring at the stream of filthy insects. Shiriam hopped up on her chair. Swan channeled and began to squash the creatures closest to her. Romanda hated to use the one power for death, even on such vile creatures, but she too found herself channeling air and smashing the insects in swaths, but the creatures were pouring in too quickly. Soon the ground was swarming with them, and the Aes Sedai were forced to scramble out of the tent and into the quiet darkness of the camp. Rorik pulled the flaps shut, though that wouldn't stop the insects from squeezing out. Outside, Romanda couldn't stop herself from running her fingers through her hair, just in case, to make certain none of the creatures had gotten into it. She shivered as she imagined the creatures scrambling over her body. Is there anything in the tent that is dear to you? Lelaine asked, looking back at the tent. Through the lamplight, she could see the shadowy insects scurrying up the walls. Romanda spared a thought for her journal, but knew that she'd never be able to touch those pages after her tent had been infested this way. Nothing that I'd care to keep now, she said, weaving fire, and nothing I can't replace. The others joined her, and the tent burst into flames, Rorik jumping back as they channeled. Romanda thought she heard the insects popping and sizzling inside. The Aes Sedai moved back from the sudden heat. In moments, the entire tent was an inferno. Women rushed out of nearby tents to look. I do no think that was natural. Magla said softly. Those did be four-spine roaches. Sailors do see them on ships that visit Shara. Well, it isn't the worst we've seen from the Dark One, Swan said, folding her arms. And we'll see worse yet. Mark my words. She eyed Shamarin. Come, I want that map from you. They left with Rorik and the others, who would alert the camp that the Dark One had touched it this night. Ramonda stood watching the tent burn. Soon it was only smoldering coals. Light, she thought. Egwene is right. It is coming, fast. And the girl was imprisoned now. She'd met with the Hall the night before in the world of dreams, informing them of her disastrous dinner with Elida and the aftermath of insulting the false Amerlin. And yet Egwene still refused rescue. Torches were lit and warders roused as a precaution against more evil. She smelled smoke. That was the remains of all she had owned in the world. The tower needed to be whole, whatever it took. Would she be willing to bow before Elida to make that happen? Would she put on an accepted dress again if it would bring unity for the last battle? She couldn't decide. And that disturbed her nearly as much as those scuttling roaches had.
Chapter 27. The Tipsy Gelding. Matt didn't escape the camp without the Aes Sedai, of course. Bloody women. He rode down the ancient stone roadway, no longer followed by the band. He was, however, accompanied by the 3 Aes Sedai, 2 warders, 5 soldiers, Talmanas, a pack animal, and Tom. At least Aludra, Amathera, and Eginan hadn't insisted on coming. This group was too big as it was. The 3 needle pines guarded the road, smelling of pine sap, and the air was melodic with mountain finches' calls. It was still several hours until sundown. He halted the band near noon. He rode slightly ahead of the clustered Aes Sedai and warders. After he'd refused Jolene horses and funds, they hadn't been about to let him win another point. Not when they could force him to take them down to the village, where they could spend at least one night in an inn with soft beds and warm baths. He didn't argue too loudly. He hated to have more tongues wagging about the band, and women did gossip, even Aes Sedai. But there was little chance of the band passing without causing a stir in the village anyway. If any Seanchan patrols made it through these twisting mountain paths, well, Matt would just have to keep the band on a steady pace northward, and that was that. No use crying about it. Besides, he was beginning to feel right again, riding Pips down that road, spring breeze crisp in the air. He'd taken to wearing one of his older coats, red with brown trim, unbuttoned to show his old tan shirt beneath. This was what it was about. Traveling to new villages, throwing dice in the inns, pinching a few barmaids. He would not think of Tuon, blaming Seanchan. She'd be all right, wouldn't she? No, his hands almost itched to be at the dicing. It had been far too long since he'd sat down in a corner somewhere and thrown with the ordinary sort. They'd be a little dirtier of face and coarser of language, but as good of heart as any man. Better than most lords. Talmanas rode just ahead. He'd probably wish for a nicer tavern than Matt, a place to join a game of cards, rather than throwing dice. But they might not have much of a choice. The village was of decent size, probably worthy of being called a town, but was unlikely to have more than 3 or 4 inns. Their choices would be limited. Decent size, Matt thought, grinning to himself as he took off his hat and scratched at the back of his head. Hinderstap would only have 3 or 4 inns, and that made it a small town. Why, Matt could remember when he thought Barrelon a large city, and it probably wasn't much larger than this Hinderstap. A horse pulled up beside him. Tom was looking at that blasted letter again. The lanky gleeman's face was thoughtful, his white hair stirring in the breeze as he stared down at the words, as if he hadn't read them 1,000 times already. "Why don't you put that away?" Matt said. Tom looked up. It had taken some talking to get the gleeman to come down to the village, but Tom needed it, needed some distraction. "I mean it, Tom," Matt said. "I know you're eager to go after Moiraine, but it'll be weeks before we can break away. and reading over those words won't do anything but make you anxious. Tom nodded and folded the paper with reverent fingers. You're right, Matt. But I've been carrying this letter for months. Now that I've shared it, I feel, well, I just want to be on with it. I know, Matt said, looking up toward the horizon. Moraine. The Tower of Genjai. Matt almost felt as if he could see the building out there looming. That's where his path pointed, and Camelin was just a stepping stone along the way. If Moraine was still alive, light, what would that mean? How would Rand react? The rescue was another reason Matt felt he needed a good night dicing. Why had he agreed to go with Tom into the tower? Those burning snakes and foxes.
It's fixed
He had
now.
no desire to see them again. But he also couldn't let Tom go alone. There was an inevitability to it, as if a part of Matt had known all along that he had to go back and face those creatures again. They'd gotten the better of him twice now, and the eelfin had tied strings around his brain with those memories in his head. He had a debt to settle with them, that was for certain. Matt had little love for Moraine, but he wouldn't leave her to them, no matter that she was Aes Sedai. Bloody ashes. He'd probably be tempted to ride in and save one of the Forsaken themselves if they were trapped there. And maybe one was. Lanfear had fallen through that same portal. Burnham, what would he do if he found her there? Would he really rescue her as well? You're a fool, Matrim Cawthon. Not a hero, just a fool. We'll get to Moraine, Tom, Matt said. You have my word, burn me. We'll find her. But we have to see the band someplace safe. And we need information. Bail Doman says he knows where the tower is, but I won't be comfortable until we can go to some large city and sniff for rumors and stories about this tower. Someone has to know something. Besides, we'll need supplies. And I doubt we'll find what we need in these mountain villages. We need to reach Camelin if possible, though maybe we'll stop at Four Kings on the way. Tom nodded, though Matt could see he chafed at leaving Moraine trapped, being tortured or who knows what. Tom's brilliant blue eyes got a far-off look to them. Why did he care so much?
Oh yeah, I
What
gotta
was
roll
Moraine
one up
to
too.
him?
I've been
But another Aes Sedai,
repairing my belt.
one of those who had cost the life of
I had
Tom's
a
nephew.
gorilla tape it.
Burn it, Matt said. We're not supposed to be thinking about things like this, Tom.
So
We're going to have a good night of dice and laughter. There'll probably be some time for a song or two as well. Tom nodded, face growing lighter. He had his harp case strapped to the back of his horse. It would be good to see him open it again. You plan to try juggling for your supper again, apprentice? Tom asked, eyes twinkling. Better than trying to play that blasted flute, Matt grumbled. Never was very good at that. Rand took to it right fine now, didn't he? Colors swirled in Matt's head, resolving to an image of Rand sitting alone in a room by himself. He sat splay-legged in a richly embroidered shirt, a coat of black and red tossed aside and crumpled next to the log wall beside him. Rand had one hand to his forehead as if trying to squeeze away the pain of a headache. His other was... that arm ended in a stump. The first time Matt had seen that, a few weeks back, it had shocked him. How had Rand lost the hand? The man barely seemed alive, propped up like that, unmoving. Though his lips did seem to be moving, mumbling or muttering. Light, Matt thought. Burn you, what are you doing to yourself? Well, at least Matt wasn't near him. Count your fortunes in that, Matt told himself. Life hadn't been so easy lately, but he could have been stuck near Rand. Sure, Rand was a friend. But Matt didn't mean to be there when Rand went insane and killed everyone he knew. There was friendship and then there was stupidity. They'd fight together at the last battle, of course, no helping that. Matt just hoped to be on the other side of that battlefield from any Sayadine.
I've had this belt for
All
5-6 years.
Tom said. That boy could have
'Cause it
made a
was,
life for himself as a
It's
gleeman.
buffalo leather.
Maybe even a proper bard if he'd started when he was younger. Matt shook his head, dispelling the vision. Burn you, Rand, leave me alone. Those were better days, weren't they, Matt? Tom smiled. The three of us traveling down the river Aranel. Murderall chasing us for reasons unknown, Matt added grimly. Those days hadn't been so easy either. Dark friends trying to stab us in the back every time we turned around. Better than Golem and Forsaken trying to kill us. That's like saying you're grateful to have a noose around your neck instead of a sword in your gut. At least you can escape the noose, Matt. Tom knuckled his long white mustache. Once the sword is stuck into you, there's not much you can do about it. Matt hesitated, then found himself laughing. He rubbed at the scarf around his neck. I suppose you're right at that, Tom. I suppose you're right. Well, for today, why don't we forget about all of that? We'll go back and pretend things are like they once were. I don't know if that's possible, Matt. Sure it is, Matt said stubbornly. Oh? Tom asked, amused. You're going to go back to thinking that old Tom Maryland is the wisest, most well-traveled man you've ever known? You'll play the gawking peasant again? Clinging to my coat every time we pass a village with more than one inn in it? Here now, I wasn't so bad as all that. I hasten to differ, Matt, Tom said, chuckling. I don't remember much. Matt scratched at his head again. But I do recall that Rand and I did right well for ourselves after we split up with you. We made it to Camelin at least. Brought your flaming harp back to you unharmed, didn't we? I noticed a few nicks in the frame. Burn you, none of that, Matt said, pointing at him. Rand practically slept with that harp. Wouldn't think of selling it, even when we were so hungry we'd have gnawed on our own boots if we hadn't needed them to get to the next town. Those days were fuzzy to Matt, full of holes, like an iron bucket left too long to rust. But he had pieced together some things. Tom chuckled. We can't go back, Matt. The wheel is turned for better or worse, and it will keep on turning as lights die and forests dim, storms call and skies break. Turn it will. The wheel is not hope, and the wheel does not care. The wheel simply is. But so long as it turns, folk may hope, folk may care. For with light that fades, another will eventually grow, and each storm that rages must eventually die. As long as the wheel turns. As long as it turns. Matt guided Pips around a particularly deep cleft in the broken roadway. Ahead, Tomanis chatted with several of their guards. That is the sound of a song about it, Tom. Aye, Tom said, almost with a sigh. An old one, forgotten by most. I've discovered 3 versions of it, all with the same words, set to different tunes. I guess the area has me thinking of it. It's said that Doriel herself penned the original poem. The area? Matt said with surprise, glancing at the 3 needle pines. Tom nodded, thoughtful. This road is old, Matt. Ancient. Probably was here before the breaking. Landmarks like this have a tendency to find their way into songs and stories. I think this area is what was once called the Splintered Hills. If that's true, then we're in what was once Coromanda, right near the Eagle's Reaches. I bet you if we climbed a few of those taller hills, we'd find old fortifications. And what does that have to do with Doriel? Matt asked, uncomfortably. She'd been queen of Ardhall. She visited here, Tom said, penned several of her finest poems in the Eagle's Reaches. Burn me, Matt thought. I remember. He remembered standing on the walls of a high fort, cold on the mountaintop, looking down at a long, twisting roadway, broken and shattered, and an army of men with violet pennants charging up the hillside into a rain of arrows. The Splintered Hills. A woman on the balcony. The queen herself. He shivered, banishing the memory. Ardhall had been one of the ancient nations that had stood long ago when Manetheren had been a power. The capital of Ardhall had another name. Shadar Logoth. Matt hadn't felt the pull of the ruby dagger in a very long time. He was nearly beginning to forget what it had been like to be tied to it, if it was possible to forget such a thing. But sometimes he remembered that ruby, red like his own blood, and the old lust, the old desire, would seep into him again. Matt shook his head, forcing down those memories. Burnett, he was supposed to be enjoying himself. What a time we've had, Tom said idly. I feel old these days, Matt, like a faded rug, hung out to dry in the wind, hinting of the colors it once showed so vibrantly. Sometimes I wonder if I'm any use to you anymore. You hardly seem to need me. What? Of course I need you, Tom. The aging gleeman eyed him. The trouble with you, Matt, is that you're actually good at lying. Unlike those other two boys. I mean it. Burn me, but I do. I suppose you could run off and tell stories and travel like you used to, but things around here might run a lot less smoothly, and I sure would miss your wisdom. Burn me, but I would. A man needs friends he can trust, and I'd trust you with my life any day.
Hell yeah. I was gonna get,
Naturally,
I'm slacking
Tom
on
said,
that part. Give me
looking
one
up,
second.
eyes glimmering with mirth. Bolstering a man's spirits when he's down? Convincing him to stay and do what is important rather than running off to seek adventure? That sounds downright responsible. What's gotten into you? Matt grimaced. Marriage, I guess. Burn me, but I'm not going to stop drinking or gambling. Ahead, Talmanis turned around and glanced at Matt, then rolled his eyes.
Yep, slacking.
Tom laughed, watching Talmanis. Well, lad, I didn't mean to get your spirits down. Just idle talk. I still have a few things I can show this world. If I really can free Moraine, well, we'll see. Besides, somebody needs to be here to watch, then put this all to song someday. There will be more than one ballad that comes from all of this. He turned, rifling through his saddlebags. Ah, he said, pulling out his patchwork gleeman's cloak. He threw it on with a flourish. Well, Matt said, when you write about us, you might find a few gold marks in it if you saw your way to include a nice verse about Talmanis. You know, something about how he has one eye that stares in strange directions and how he often carries this scent about him, which reminds one of a goat pen. I heard that, Talmanis called from ahead. I meant you to, Matt called back. Tom just laughed, plucking at his cloak, arranging it for best display. I can't promise anything, he chuckled some more. Though if you don't mind, Matt, I think I'll separate from the rest of you once we get into the village. A gleeman's ears may pick up information that won't be spoken in the presence of soldiers. Information would be nice, Matt said, rubbing his chin. The trail turned up ahead. Bannon said they'd find the village just beyond the turn. I feel as though I've been traveling through a tunnel for months now, with no sight or sound of the world outside. Burn me, but it would be nice to know where Rand is, if only to know where not to go. The colors spun, showing him Rand, but the man was standing in a room with no view of the outside, giving Matt no clue as to where he might be. Life's that tunnel most times, I'm afraid, Tom said. People expect the gleeman to bring information, so we pull it out and brush it off for display. But much of the news we tell is just another batch of stories, in many cases less true than the ballads from 1,000 years ago. Matt nodded. And, Tom added, I'll see if I can dig up hints for the incursion. The Tower of Genjai. Matt shrugged. We're more likely to find what we need in Fort Kings or Camelin. Yes, I know, but Olva made me promise to check. If you hadn't set Noel to keeping the boy distracted, I'd expect to open our saddlebags and find him in there. He really wanted to come. A night dancing and gambling is no place for a boy, Matt muttered. I just wish I could trust the men back at camp not to corrupt him worse than a tavern would. Well, he stayed back quietly enough once Noel got out the board. Oliver was convinced that if he played snakes and foxes enough, he'd pick out some secret strategy for defeating the Aelfin and Eelfin. The lad still thinks he's coming with us into the tower, Tom said more quietly. He knows he can't be one of the three, but he plans to wait outside for us. Maybe burst in to save us if we don't come back soon enough. I don't want to be there when he discovers the truth. I don't intend to be there myself, Matt said. Ahead, the trees broke wide into a small valley with green pastures rising high along the hills to the sides. A town of several hundred buildings was nestled between the slopes, a mountain stream running down the middle. The houses were of deep gray stone, each with a prominent chimney, most of which curled with smoke. The roofs were sloped to deal with what were probably very snowy winters, though the only white still visible now was on distant peaks. Workers were already busy on several of the roofs replacing winter-damaged shingles, and goats and sheep grazed the hillsides, watched over by shepherd boys. There were a few hours of light remaining, and other men worked on shop fronts and fences. Others strolled through the streets of the village, no urgency in their gait. Overall, the little town had a relaxing air of mixed industry and laziness. Matt pulled up beside Tilmanis and the soldiers. That's a nice sight, Tilmanis noted. I was beginning to think every town in the world was either falling apart, packed with refugees, or under the thumb of invaders. At least this one doesn't seem likely to vanish on us. Lights send it so, Matt said, shivering, thinking of the town in Altara that had vanished. Anyway, let's hope they don't mind dealing with a few strangers. He eyed the soldiers. All 5 were Red Arms, among the best he had. 3 of you 5 go with the Aes
Got
Sedai.
one rolled.
I suspect they'll want to stay at a different inn from myself. We'll meet up in the morning. The soldiers saluted, and Jolene sniffed as she passed on her horse, pointedly not looking at Matt. She and the others headed down the incline in a little cluster, 3 of Matt's soldiers following. That looks like an inn there, Tom said, pointing toward a larger building on the eastern side of the village. You'll find me there. He waved, then kicked his mount into a trot and rode on ahead, Gleeman's cloak streaming. Arriving first would give him the best chance at a dramatic entrance. Matt glanced at Tilmanis, who shrugged. The 2 of them made their way down the slope with 2 soldiers as an escort. Because of the bend in the road, they were approaching from the southwest. To the northeast of the village, the ancient roadway continued. It looked strange to have such a large road leading past a
Trying
village
to
like
get the other
this,
one done.
even if that road was old and broken. Master Roydell claimed that it would lead them straight up into Andor. It was too uneven to be used as a major highway, and the direction it led no longer passed major cities, so it had been forgotten. Matt blessed their luck in finding it, though. The main passages into Mirundi had been crowded with Sean-Chan. According to Roydell's maps, Hinderstap specialized in producing goat's cheese and mutton for the various towns and manor lands in the region. The villagers should be used to outsiders. Indeed, several boys came running from the fields the moment they spotted Tom and his Gleeman's cloak. He'd make a stir, but a familiar one. The Aes Sedai, though, would be memorable. Ah, well, he thought as he and Tilmanis rode down the grass-lined road. He would retain his good humor. This time he would not let the Aes Sedai ruin it. By the time Matt and Tilmanis reached the village, Tom had already gathered a small crowd. He stood upright on his saddle and juggled 3 colored balls in his right hand while talking of his travels in the south. The villagers here wore vests and green cloaks of a deep velvety cloth. They looked warm, though upon closer inspection Matt noticed that many of them, cloaks, vests, and trousers, had been torn and carefully mended. Another group of people, mostly women, had gathered around the Aes Sedai. Good. Matt had half expected the villagers to be frightened. One of those standing at the side of Tom's group eyed Matt and Tilmanis appraisingly. He was a sturdy fellow with thick arms and linen sleeves that were rolled to the elbows despite the chill spring air. His arms curled with dark hair that matched his beard and the locks on his head. You have the look of a lord about you, the man said, approaching Matt. He's a Tilmanis began before Matt cut him off hastily. I suppose I do at that, Matt said, keeping an eye on Tilmanis. I'm Barlden, the mayor here, the man said, folding his arms. You're welcome to come and trade. Be aware that we don't have much to spare. Surely you at least have some cheese, Talmanis said. That's what you produce, isn't it? All that hasn't molded or spoiled is needed for our custom, Mayor Barlden said. That's just the way of things these days. He hesitated. But if you have cloth or clothing you'll trade, we might be able to scrape something up to feed you for the day. Feed us for a day, Matt thought. All 11 of us? He'd need to bring a wagon load back at least, not to mention the ale he'd promised his men. You'll still need to hear about the curfew. Trade, warm yourselves by the hearths for a time, but know that all outsiders must be out of the town by nightfall. Matt glanced up at the cloud-covered sky. But that's barely 3 hours away. Those are our rules, Barlden said curtly. It's ridiculous, Jolene said, turning away from the village women. She nudged her horse a little closer to Matt and Talmanis, her warders, as always, shadowing her. Master Barlden, we cannot agree to this foolish prohibition. I understand your hesitation during these dangerous times, but surely you can see that your rules should not apply here. The man kept his arms folded and said nothing. Jolene pursed her lips, rearranging her hands on her reins so that her great serpent ring was prominently visible. Does the symbol of the White Tower mean so little these days? We respect the White Tower. Barlden looked at Matt. He was wise. Meeting the gaze of an Aes Sedai tended to make one's resolve weaken. But our rules are strict, milady. I'm sorry. Jolene sniffed. I suspect that your innkeepers are less than satisfied with this requirement. How are they to make ends meet if they can't rent rooms to travelers? The inns are compensated, the mayor said gruffly. 3 hours. Do your business and be on your way. We mean to be friendly to all who pass our way, but we can't see our rules broken. With that, he turned and left. As he walked away, he was joined by a small group of burly men, several carrying axes. Not threateningly, casually, as if they'd been out chopping wood, and just happened to be walking through town. Together, in the same direction as the mayor. I should say this is quite the welcome, Talmanis muttered. Matt nodded. At that moment, the dice started rattling in his head. Burn it. He decided to ignore them. They were never any help anyway. Let's go find a tavern, he said, heeling Pips forward. Still determined to make a night of it, eh? Talmanis said, smiling as he joined Matt. We'll see, Matt said, listening to those dice despite himself. We'll see. Matt spotted 3 inns on his initial ride through the village. There was one at the end of the main thoroughfare, and it had 2 bright lanterns burning out front, even though night hadn't yet fallen. Those whitewashed walls and clean glass windows would draw the Aes Sedai like moths to a flame. That would be the inn for traveling merchants and dignitaries unfortunate enough to find themselves in these hills. But outsiders couldn't stay the night now. How long had that prohibition been in place? How did these inns maintain themselves? They could still provide a bath and meal, but without renting rooms. Matt didn't buy the mayor's comment about inns being compensated. If they weren't doing anything useful for the village, why pay them? It was just plain odd. Anyway, Matt didn't head for the nice inn, nor the one Tom had chosen. That one wasn't on the main road, but was on a wide street just to the northeast. It would serve the average visitor, respectable men and women who didn't like to spend what they didn't have to. The building was well cared for, the beds would be clean, and the meals satisfactory. The locals would visit for drinks on occasion, mostly when they felt that their wives were keeping a close eye on them. The last inn would have been the most difficult to find had Matt not known where to look for it. It was 3 streets out from the center, in the back west corner of the village. No sign hung out front, just a wooden board carved with what looked like a drunken horse that sat inside one of the windows. None of those windows had glass. Light and laughter came from inside. Most outsiders would have been made uncomfortable by the lack of an inviting sign and street lanterns near this inn. It was really more of a tavern than an inn. Matt doubted if it had ever held anything other than a few pallets in the back that one could rent for a copper. This was the place for working locals to relax. With evening approaching, many would have already made their way here. It was a place for community and for relaxation, a place for smoking a pinch of tobacco with your friends, and for throwing a few games of dice. Matt smiled and dismounted, then hitched Pips to the post outside. Talmana sighed. You realize that they probably water their drinks? Then we'll have to order twice as many, Matt said, undoing a few bags of coins from his saddle and stuffing them in pockets inside his coat. He gestured for his soldiers to stay and guard the horses. The pack animal carried a coin chest. It contained Matt's personal stash. He wouldn't risk the band's wages on gambling. All right, then, Talmana said. But you realize that I'm going to make certain that you and I go to a proper tavern once we reach Four Kings. I'll have you educated yet, Matt. You're a prince now. You'll need... Matt held up a hand, cutting Talmanas off. Then he pointed at the post. Talmanas sighed again and slid free of the saddle, then hitched his horse. Matt stepped up to the tavern door, took a deep breath, and entered. Men crowded around tables, their cloaks draped over chairs or hung on pegs, their ripped and resewn vests unbuttoned, their sleeves rolled up. Why did people here wear clothing that was once so nice, yet now torn and patched? They had plenty of sheep, and should therefore have wool to spare. Matt ignored the oddity for the moment. The men in this place played at dice, drank mugs of ale off of sticky tables, and slept at the backsides of passing barmaids. They seemed exhausted, many of their eyes drooping with fatigue. But that was to be expected after a day's work. Despite the tired eyes, there was an almost palpable chatter in the room, voices overlapping one another in low, rumbling murmurs. A few people looked up as Matt entered, and some of them frowned at his nice clothing, but most people paid him no heed. Talmanas followed reluctantly, but he wasn't the type of nobleman who minded rubbing shoulders with those of lower station. He'd visited his share of seedy taverns in his time, even if he had taken to complaining about Matt's choices. And so Talmanas was as quick as Matt to pull a chair up to a table where a few men already
cheers.
sat. Matt smiled broadly and flashed
Got
gold,
extra
tossing
one
it to the
rolled up.
passing barmaid and demanding some drinks. That got some attention, both from those around the table and from Talmanas. What are you doing? Talmanas hissed, leaning toward Matt. You want to see us slit open the moment we stumble out of here? Matt just smiled. One of the nearby tables had a dice game going. Looked like cat's paw, or at least that's what it had been called the night Matt had first been taught it. They called it Third Gem in Ebu Dar, and he'd heard it called Feathers Aloft in
I'll
Cairo.
be right back.
It was the perfect game for his purposes. There was only one dicer in the game, with the crowd of onlookers betting against or for his tosses. Matt took a deep breath, then pulled his chair over to the table, snapping a gold crown onto the wood directly in the center of a wet ring of ale made by the bottom of a mug, now held by a short fellow who'd lost most of his mousy hair. But what he did have hung long down around his collar. He almost choked on his ale. Care if I make a throw? Matt said to the table's occupants. I don't know if we can match that, said a man with a short black beard. My lord, he added belatedly. My gold against your silver, Matt said lightly. I haven't had a good game of dice in ages. Talmanas pulled his chair over, interested. He'd seen Matt do this before, putting down gold coins and winning silvers. Matt's luck made up for the difference, and he always came out far ahead. Sometimes he could come out ahead playing gold for coppers. That didn't make him much money. It only took so long before the men involved either ran out of coin or decided to stop playing, and Matt would be left with a handful of silvers and nobody to dice with. That wouldn't help. The army had plenty of coin, It needed food, and so it was time to try something different. Several of the men set down silver coins. Matt shook the dice in his hands, then tossed. Blessedly, the dice came up with one showing a single pip and the other showing 2, an instant loss. Tomanis blinked, and the men around the table glanced at Matt, looking chagrined, as if embarrassed to have bet against a lord who obviously wasn't expecting to lose. That was an easy way to get oneself in trouble.
Ugh.
Well, look at that, Matt said. Guess you win. It's yours. He rolled the gold crown to the center of the table
Oh,
to be
that's a
split
little
among the
chilly
men
up
who
there.
had bet against him, as per the rules.
I went out and put that
How
on
about another?
the
Matt
belt
said,
where I
slapping
kicked
down
it
2
up. I went
gold
out and put it
crowns. There were
in the
more
vice
tickets this time.
outside, real tight.
Again,
to
he threw and lost,
give it a little
nearly sending
extra
Tomanis into a choking fit.
hope and bonding, I
Matt
guess
had
you
lost
say.
throws before. It happened even to him. But 2 throws in a row? He sent the 2 crowns rolling, and then he pulled out 4. Tomanis placed a hand on his arm. No offense, Matt, the man said in a quiet voice, but maybe you should stop. Everyone has an off night. Let's finish our drinks and go buy what supplies we can before night falls. Matt just smiled and watched as the bets piled up against his 4 coins. He had to lay down a 5th, since so many people only won the toss. He ignored Tomanis and threw, losing yet again. Tomanis groaned, then reached over and took a mug from the serving girl who had finally arrived to fill Matt's order. Don't look so grim, Matt said softly, hefting the pouch in his hand as he reached for his own mug. This is what I wanted. Tomanis raised an eyebrow, lowering his mug. Matt said, I can lose when I want to, if it's for the best. How can losing be for the best? Tomanis asked, watching the men argue about how to divide Matt's gold. Wait. Matt took a slurp of ale. It was as watered down as Tomanis had feared. Matt turned back to the table, counting out a few more gold coins. As the time passed, more and more people began gathering around the table. Matt made sure to win a few tosses, just as he had to lose a bit when spending a night winning. He didn't want to arouse any suspicions about his losing streak. Yet, bit by bit, the coins in his pouches ended up in the hands of the men playing against him. Before long, all was silent in the tavern, men crowding around Matt and waiting their turn to bet against him. Sons and friends had run to grab their fathers and cousins, dragging them to the tipsy gelding, as the inn was called. At one point, during a break in the throws while Matt was waiting for another mug of ale, Tomanis pulled him aside. I don't like this, Matt, the wiry man said in a low voice, leaning in. Sweat had long since streaked the powder on his shaved forehead, and he'd wiped it away, leaving the skin bare. I told you. Matt took a swig of watery ale. I know what I'm doing. Men cheered to the side as one of them drank 3 mugs, one after another. The air smelt of sweat and muddy ale, spilled to the wood floor, then trampled by the boots of those arriving from the pastures. Not that, Tomanis said, glancing at the cheering men. You can waste your coin if you want to, so long as you spare a few coins to buy me a drink now and then. That's not what's bothering me. Not anymore. Matt frowned. What? Something feels wrong about these folk, Matt. Tomanis spoke very softly, glancing over his shoulder. While you've been playing, I've been talking to them. They don't care about the world. The Dragon Reborn, the Shawnshan, nothing. Not a care. So, Matt said, they're simple folk. Simple folk should worry even more, Tomanis said. They're trapped here between gathering armies, but these just shrug when I talk, then drink some more. It's as if they're too focused on their revelry, as if it's all that matters to them. Then they're perfect, Matt said. It'll be dark soon, Tomanis said, glancing at the window. We've used an hour, probably more. Maybe we should... At that moment, the door of the inn slammed open, and the burly mayor entered, accompanied by the men who had joined him earlier, although they'd left their axes behind. They didn't look pleased to find half the village inside the tavern gambling with Matt. Matt, Telmanis began again. Matt raised a hand, cutting him off. This is what we've been waiting for. It is? Telmanis asked. Matt turned back to the dicing table, smiling. He'd gone through most of his bags of coins, but he had enough for a few more throws, not counting what he'd brought along outside, of course. He picked up the dice and counted out some gold crowns, and the crowd began to throw down coins of their own, many of which by now were gold ones they'd won from Matt. He tossed and lost, causing a roar of excitement from those watching. Barldon looked as if he wanted to toss Matt out. It was getting late, and sunset couldn't be far off, but the man hesitated when he saw Matt pull out another handful of gold coins. Greed nibbled every man, and strict rules could be bent if opportunity walked past and winked suggestively enough. Matt tossed again, and lost. More roars. The mayor folded his arms. Matt reached into his pouch and found nothing but air. The men around him looked crestfallen, and one called for a round of drinks to help the poor young lord forget about his luck. Not bloody likely, Matt thought, covering a smile. He stood up, raising his hands. I see it's getting late, he said to the room. Too late, Barldon interjected, pushing past a few smelly goat herds with fur-collared cloaks. You should be going, Outlander. Don't be thinking I'll make these men give back what you lost to them fairly, either. I wouldn't dream of it, Matt said, slurring his words just a tad. Harnan and Delarn, he bellowed. Bring in the chest. The two soldiers from outside hurried in a moment later, bearing the small wooden chest from the pack horse. The tavern grew silent as the soldier carried it over to the table and set it down. Matt fished out the key, wobbling slightly, then unlocked the lid and revealed the contents. Gold. A lot of it. Practically all he had left of his personal coin. There's time for one more throw, Matt said to a stunned room. Any takers? Men began to toss down coins until the pile contained most of what Matt had lost. It wasn't nearly enough to match what was in his chest. He looked it over, tapping his chin. That's not going to be enough, friends. I'll take a bad bet. But if I've only got one more throw tonight, I want a chance of walking out of here with something. It's all we've got, one of the men said, amid a few calls for Matt to go ahead and toss anyway. Matt sighed, then closed the lid to the chest. No, he said. Even Barldon was watching with a gleam in his eyes. Unless, Matt paused. I came here for supplies. I guess I'd take barter. You can keep the coins you won, but I'll bet this chest for supplies. Foodstuffs for my men. A few casks of ale. A cart to carry it on. There isn't enough time. Barldon glanced at the darkening windows. Surely there is, Matt said, leaning forward. I'll leave after this toss. You'll have my word on it. We don't bend rules here, the mayor said. The price is too high. Matt expected calls from the betting men, challenging the mayor, begging them to make an exception. But there were none. Matt felt a sudden spike of fear. After all of that losing, if they kicked him out anyway. Desperate, he pulled open the top of the chest again, revealing the gold coins inside. I'll give you the ale, the innkeeper said. And Marjorie, you've got a wagon and team. It's only down the street. Yes, said Marjorie, a bluff-faced man with short dark hair. I'll bet that. Men began to call that they could offer food. Grain from their pantries, potatoes from their cellars. Matt looked at the mayor. There's still gotta be what? Half an hour until nightfall? Why don't we see what they can gather? The village store can have a piece of this too if I lose. I'll bet you could use the extra coin, what with the winner we had. Barldon hesitated, then nodded, still watching the chest of coins. Men whooped and ran about, fetching the wagon, rolling out the ale. More than a few galloped off for their homes or the village store. Matt watched them go, waiting in the quickly emptying tavern room. "I see what you're doing," the mayor said to Matt. He didn't seem to be in a rush to gather anything. Matt turned toward him questioningly. "I won't have you cheating us with a miracle win at the end of the evening." Walton folded his arms. "You'll use my dice, and you'll move nice and slow as you toss. I know you lost many games here, as the men report, but I suspect that if we search you, we'll find a couple of sets of dice hidden on your person." "You're welcome to give me a search," Matt said, raising his arms to the side. Walton hesitated. "You will have thrown them away, of course," he finally said. "It's a fine scheme, dressing like a lord, loading dice so they make you lose instead of win. Never heard of a man bold enough to throw away gold like that on fake dice." "If you're so certain that I'm cheating," Matt said, "then why go through with this?" "Because I know how to stop you," the mayor replied. "Like I said, you'll use my dice on this throw." He hesitated, then smiled, grabbing a pair of dice off the table that Matt had been using. He tossed them. They came up a 1 and a 2. He tossed them again and got the same result. "Better yet," the mayor smiled deeply, "you'll use these. In fact, I'll make the throw for you." Walden's face in the dim light took on a decidedly sinister cast. Matt felt a stab of panic. Tolmanis took his arm. "All right, Matt," he said. "I think we should go." Matt held up a hand. Would his luck work if someone else threw? Sometimes it worked to prevent him from being wounded in combat. He was sure of that. Wasn't he? "Go ahead," he said to Walden. The man looked shocked. "You can make the throw," Matt said. "But it counts the same as if I'd tossed. A winning hand and I walk away with everything. A losing hand, and I'll be on my way with my hat and my horse, and you can keep the bloody chest. Agreed?" "Agreed." Matt stuck out his hand for a shake, but the mayor turned away, holding the dice in his hand. "No," he said. "You'll get no chance to swap these dice, traveler. Let's just go out front and wait. And you keep your distance." They did as he said, leaving the muggy, ale-soaked stench of the tavern for the clear street outside. Matt's soldiers brought the chest. Walden demanded that the chest remain open so that it couldn't be switched. One of his thugs poked around inside it, biting the coins, making certain that it really was full and that the coins were authentic. Matt waited, leaning against the door as a wagon rolled up, and then from inside the tavern began rolling casks of ale onto its bed. The sun was barely a haze of light on the horizon behind those blasted clouds. As Matt waited, he saw the mayor grow more and more anxious. Blood and bloody ashes, the man was a stickler for his rules. Well, Matt would show him, and all of them. He'd show them... Show them what? That he couldn't be beaten? What did that prove? As Matt waited, the cart piled higher and higher with foodstuffs, and he began to feel a strange sense of guilt. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he thought. "I've got to feed my men, don't I? These men are betting fair, and I'm betting fair. No loaded dice, no cheating. Except his luck. Well, his luck was his own, just as every man's luck was his own. Some men were born with a talent for music, and they became bards and gleemen. Who begrudged them earning coin with what the Creator gave them? Matt had luck, and so he used it. There was nothing wrong with that. Still, as the men came back into the inn, he started to see what it was that Talmanis had noticed. There was an edge of desperation to these men. Had they been too eager to gamble? Had they been foolhardy with their betting? What was that look in their eyes, a look that Matt had mistaken for weariness? Had they been drinking to celebrate the end of the day, or had they been drinking to banish that haunted cast in their eyes? "Maybe you were right," Matt said to Talmanis, who was watching the sun with almost as much anxiety as the mayor. Its last light was dusting the tops of the peaked homes, coloring the tan tile a deeper orange. The sunset was ablaze behind the clouds. "We can go, then?" Telmanus asked. "No," Matt said. "We're staying." And the dice stopped rattling in his head. It was so sudden, the silence so unexpected, that he froze. It was enough to make him think he'd made the wrong decision. "Burn me, we're staying," he repeated. "I've never backed down from a bet before, and I don't plan to now." A group of riders returned, bearing sacks of grain on their horses. It was amazing what a little coin could do for motivation. As more riders arrived, a young boy came trotting up the road. "Mayor," he said, tugging on Barlden's purple vest. That vest bore a crisscross of patched rips across the front. "Mother says that the Outlander women aren't done bathing. She's trying to hurry them, but—" The mayor tensed. He glanced at Matt angrily. Matt snorted. "Don't think I can do anything to hurry that lot," he said. "If I were to go rush them, they'd likely dig in like mules and take twice as long. Let somebody else bloody have a turn dealing with them." Telmanus kept glancing at the lengthening shadows along the road. "Burn me," he muttered. "If those ghosts start appearing again, Matt." "This is something else," Matt said as the newcomers threw their grain onto the wagon. "It feels different." The wagon was already loaded high with foodstuffs, a good haul to have purchased from a village this size. It was just what the band needed, enough to nudge them along, keep them fed until they reached the next town. That food wasn't worth the gold in the coffer, of course, but it was about equal to what he'd lost dicing inside, particularly with the wagon and horses thrown in. They were good draft animals, sturdy, well cared for from the look of coat and hoof. Matt opened his mouth to say it was enough, then hesitated as he noticed that the mayor was talking quietly with a group of men. There were 6 of them, their vests drab and ragged, their black hair unkempt. One was gesturing toward Matt and holding what looked to be a sheet of paper in his hand. Barlden shook his head, but the man with the paper gestured more insistently. "Here now," Matt said softly. "What's this?" "Matt, the sun," Telmanus said. The mayor pointed sharply, and the ragged men sidled away. The men who had brought the food were crowding around the dimming street, keeping to the center of it. Most were looking toward the horizon. "Mayor," Matt called. "That's good enough. Make the throw." Barlden hesitated, glancing at him, then looked down at the dice in his hand, almost as if he'd forgotten them. The men around him nodded anxiously, and so he raised his hand in a fist, rattling the dice. The mayor looked across the street to meet Matt's eyes, then threw the dice onto the ground between them. They seemed too loud, a tiny rattling thunderstorm, like bones cracking against one another. Matt held his breath. It had been a long while since he'd had reason to worry about a toss of the dice. He leaned down, watching the white cubes tumble against the dirt. How would his luck react to someone else throwing? The dice came to a stop. A pair of 4s. An outright winning throw. Matt released a long, relieved breath, though he felt a trickle of sweat down his temple. "Matt," Telmanus said softly, making him look up. The men standing on the road didn't look so pleased. Several of them cheered in excitement until their friends explained that a winning throw from the mayor meant that Matt would take the prize. The crowd grew tense. Matt met Barlden's eyes. "Go," the burly man said, gesturing in disgust toward Matt and turning away. "Take your spoils and leave this place. Never return." "Well," Matt said, relaxing. "Thank you kindly for the game, then. We—" "Go!" the mayor bellowed. He looked at the last slivers of sunlight on the horizon, then cursed and began waving for the men to enter the tipsy gelding. Some lingered, glancing at Matt with shock or hostility, but the mayor's urgings soon bullied them into the low-roofed inn. He pulled the door shut and left Matt, Telmanus, and the 2 soldiers standing alone on the street. It suddenly seemed eerily quiet. There wasn't a villager on the street. Shouldn't there be some noise from inside the tavern, at least? Some clinking of mugs, some grumbling about the lost wager? "Well," Matt said, voice echoing against silent house fronts, I guess that's that. He walked over to Pips, calming the horse who had begun to shuffle nervously. Now, see, I told you, Tomanus. Nothing to be worried about at all. And that's when the screaming began. Chapter 28. Night in Hinderstap. Burn you, Matt, Talmanis said, yanking his sword free from the gut of a twitching villager. Talmanis almost never swore. Burn you twice over and once again. Me? Matt snapped, spinning, his Ashandarai flashing as he neatly hamstrung two men in bright green vests. They fell to the packed earthen street, eyes wide with rage as they sputtered and growled. Me? I'm not the one trying to kill you, Talmanis. Blame them. Talmanis managed to pull himself into his saddle. They told us to leave. Yes, Matt said, grabbing Pip's reins and pulling the horse away from the tipsy gelding. And now they're trying to kill us. I can't rightly be blamed for their unsociable behavior. Howls, screams, and yells rose from all across the village. Some were angry, some were terrified, others were agonized. More and more men piled out of the tavern, each one grunting and yelling, each one trying his best to kill every person around him. Some of them came for Matt, Talmanis, or Matt's Red Arms, but many just attacked their companions, hands ripping at skin, nails tearing gouges in faces. They fought with a primal lack of skill, and only a few thought to pick up rocks, mugs, or lengths of wood as weapons. This was far more than a simple bar fight. These men were trying to kill each other. Already there were a half-dozen corpses or near corpses on the street, and from what Matt could see of the inside of the inn, the fighting was equally brutal inside. Matt tried to edge closer to the wagon with its load of food, Pips clopping alongside him. His chest of gold still lay on the street. The fighting men ignored both food and coin, concentrating on each other. Talmanis, as well as Harnan and Delarn, his two soldiers, backed away with him, nervously pulling their own mounts. A group of raving men soon descended on the two villagers Matt had hamstrung, beating their heads against the ground over and over until they stopped moving. Then the pack looked up at Matt and his men, bloodlust clouding their eyes. It was an incongruous expression on the clean faces of men in neat vests and combed hair. Blood and bloody ashes, Matt said, swinging into his saddle. Mount up! Arnon and Delarn needed no further instruction. They cursed, sheathing swords and swinging into saddles. The pack of villagers surged forward, but Matt and Talmanis cut off the attack. Matt tried to go for wounding blows only, but the villagers were deceptively strong and fast, and he found himself fighting just to keep them from pulling him out of the saddle. He cursed, reluctantly beginning to wield killing blows, taking two of the men with sweeps to the neck. Pips kicked out and knocked another to the ground with a hoof to the head. In a few moments, Arnon and Delarn joined the fight. The villagers didn't back away. They kept fighting in a frenzy until the entire pack of 8 had dropped. Matt's soldiers fought with wide-eyed terror, and Matt didn't blame them. It was flaming eerie, seeing common villagers react like this. There didn't seem to be an ounce of humanity left in them. They spoke only in grunts, hisses, and screams, their faces painted with anger and bloodlust. Now the other villagers, those not directly attacking Matt's men, started forming into packs, slaughtering the groups smaller than themselves by bludgeoning them, clawing them, biting them. It was unnerving. As Matt watched, a body broke through one of the tavern window frames. The corpse rolled to the ground, neck broken. On the other side, Barlden stood with wild, nearly inhuman eyes. He screamed into the night, then saw Matt, and for just a moment seemed to show a hint of recognition. Then it was gone, and the mayor bellowed again, running forward to leap through the broken window and attack a pair of men whose backs were turned. Move, Matt said, rearing Pips as another pack of villagers saw him. The gold, Talmanis said. Burn the gold, Matt said. We can win more, and that food isn't worth our lives. Go! Talmanis and the soldiers turned their mounts and galloped down the street, Matt kicking Pips to join them, leaving the golden wagon behind. It wasn't worth their lives. If possible, he'd bring the army in on the morrow to recover it. But they had to survive first. They galloped for a short time, and Matt slowed them at the next corner, holding up a hand. He glanced over his shoulder. The villagers were still coming, but the gallop had left them behind for now. I'm still blaming you, Talmana said. I thought you liked fighting, Matt said. I like some fights, Talmana said. On the battlefield or a nice bar fight. This is insane. The pack of villagers behind had fallen to all fours and were moving in a strange lope. Talmanis shivered visibly. There was barely enough light to see by. Now that the sun had set, those mountains and the gray clouds blocked what light remained. Lanterns lined many of the streets, but it didn't look as if anyone would be lighting them. Matt, they're gaining, Talmanis said, sword held at the ready. This isn't just about our wager, Matt said, listening to the screams and shouts. They came from all around the village. Down a side road, a couple of struggling bodies burst through the upper window of a house. They were women, clawing at each other as they fell, crashing to the ground with a sickening thud. They stopped moving. Come on, Matt said, turning Pips. We've got to find Tom and the women. They galloped down a side street that would intersect with the main thoroughfare, passing packs of men and women fighting in the gutters. A fat man with bloodied cheeks stumbled into the road, and Matt reluctantly rode him down. There were too many people fighting at the sides for him to risk leading his men around the poor fool. Matt even saw children fighting, biting at the legs of those larger than they, throttling those their own age. The entire bloody town has gone insane, Matt muttered grimly, as the four of them barreled onto the main street and turned toward the fine inn. They'd pick up the Aes Sedai, then swing out eastward for Tom, as his inn was the most distant. Unfortunately, the main street was worse than the one Matt had left. It was almost completely dark now. Indeed, it seemed to him that the darkness had come too quickly here, unnaturally swift. The road's length squirmed with shadows, figures battling, screeching, struggling in the deepening gloom. In that darkness, the fights looked at times to be solid single creatures, horrific monstrosities with a dozen waving limbs and 100 mouths to scream from the blackness. Matt spurred Pips forward. There was nothing to do but charge down the middle of it. Light! Talmanis yelled as they galloped toward the inn. Light! Matt gritted his teeth and leaned forward on Pips, spear held close to his side as he rode through the nightmare. Roars shook the darkness and bodies rolled across the street. Matt shivered at the horror of it, cursing under his breath. The night itself seemed to be trying to smother them, to strangle them, and to spawn beasts of blackness and murder. Pips and the other horses were well trained, and the four of them charged straight down the street. Matt narrowly avoided being pulled from the saddle as dark forms leapt for his legs, trying to yank him free. They screamed and hissed, like legions of the drowned trying to pull him down into a deep, unearthly sea. Beside Matt, the Larn's horse suddenly pulled to a halt. Then, as a mass of black figures leaped in front of it, the gelding reared in panic, throwing DeLarn from his saddle. Matt reined in Pips, turning at the man's scream, which was somehow more distinct and more human than the howls around them. Matt, Talmanis yelled, charging past. Keep going. We can't stop. No, Matt thought, shoving down his panic. No, I'm not leaving someone to this. He took a deep breath and ignored Talmanis, kicking Pips back toward the black clot of bodies where DeLarn had fallen. Sweat sprayed from his forehead, chilled by the wind of the gallop. Moans, screams, and hisses all around him seemed to descend on him. Matt roared and threw himself from Pip's back. He couldn't bring his mount in without risking trampling the man he wanted to save. He hated fighting in darkness. He bloody hated it. He attacked those dark figures, whose faces he couldn't see save for an occasional flash of teeth or insane eyes reflecting the dying light. It reminded him briefly of another night killing shadow spawn in the dark. Save these creatures he fought didn't have the grace of a Murdraw. They didn't even have the coordination of Trollocs. For a moment, it seemed Matt fought the shadows themselves, shadows made by sputtering firelight, random and uncoordinated, yet all the more deadly for his inability to anticipate them. He narrowly escaped getting his skull crushed by attacks that made no sense. During the day, those attacks would have been laughable, but from this darkened pack of men and women who didn't care what they hit or who they hurt, the attacks were overwhelming. Matt found himself fighting just to stay alive, spinning his Ashandarai in wide arcs, using it to trip as often as he used it to kill. If something moved in the darkness, he struck. How in the light was he going to find DeLarn in this? A shadow moved just a short distance away, and Matt instinctively recognized a sword form. Rat gnawing the grain? A villager wouldn't know that. Good man. Matt spun toward that shadow, slashing two other shadows across the chest, earning grunts and howls of pain. DeLarne's figure fell beneath a pile of several others, and Matt bellowed in denial, leaping across a fallen body and landing with his spear descending in a broad sweep. Shadows bled where he struck, the blood just another patch of darkness, and Matt used the butt of his weapon to beat back another. He reached down, pulling one of the shadows to his feet, and heard a muttered curse. It was DeLarne. Come on, Matt said, pulling the man toward Pips, who stood firm, snorting in the darkness. The attacking men seemed to ignore animals, which was fortunate. Matt shoved the stumbling DeLarne toward the horse, then turned and engaged the pack he'd known would chase after him. Again, Matt danced with the darkness, striking again and again, trying to disengage so that he could climb into the saddle. He risked a glance over his shoulder and found that DeLarne had managed to get onto Pip's back. But the soldier sat slumped, a huddled mound. How badly was he wounded? He barely seemed able to keep himself upright. Blood and bloody ashes. Matt turned back to the attackers, spinning his spear, trying to force them back. But they didn't care about being wounded. They didn't care how dangerous Matt was. They just kept coming, surrounding him, coming at him from every side. Bloody ashes. He twisted just in time to see a dark shape rush him from behind. Something flashed in the night, reflecting some very distant light. The dark figure behind Matt slumped to the ground. Another flash, and one of the ones in front of Matt fell. Suddenly, a figure on a white horse rushed past, and another knife flashed in the air, dropping a third man. Tom, Matt called, recognizing the cloak. Get on your horse, Tom's voice called back. I'm running out of knives. Matt swept out with his spear, dropping two more villagers, then dashed forward and leaped into his saddle, trusting Tom to cover his retreat. Indeed, he heard a few cries of pain from behind. A moment later, a thundering sound on the road announced the imminent approach of horses. Matt pulled himself into his saddle as the creatures tore through the black morass, scattering the villagers. Matt, you fool! Someone shouted from one of the horses, barely visible as a silhouette against the night. Matt smiled gratefully at Tomanus, turning Pips and caught DeLarne as the man almost slid free. The red arm was alive, for he struggled weakly as there was a slick wet patch at his side. Matt held the man in front of him, ignoring the reins in the darkness and controlling Pips with quick twisted knees. He didn't know horseback battle commands himself, though trusted members did, and so he'd trained Pips to obey. Tom galloped past, and Matt turned Pips to follow, steadying DeLarne with one hand and carrying his spear in the other. Tomanus and Harnan rode to either side of him, charging down the corridor of madness toward the inn at the end. Come on, man, Matt whispered to DeLarne. Hang on. The Aes Sedai are just ahead. They'll fix you up. DeLarne whispered something back. Matt leaned forward. What was that? And toss the dice until we fly, DeLarne whispered. To dance with Jakku's shadow. Great, Matt muttered. There were lights ahead, and he could see they were coming from the inn. Perhaps they'd find one place in this flaming village where the people's brains hadn't turned inside out. But no. Those bursts of light were familiar. Balls of fire flashing in the upper story windows of the inn. Well, Tomanus noted from his left. Looks like the Aes Sedai still live. That's something at least. Figures clustered around the front of the inn, fighting in the darkness, their forms periodically lit from above by the flashes in the windows. Round to the back, Tom suggested. Go, Matt said to them, charging past the fighting figures. Tomanus, Tom, and Harnan followed close on Pip's hooves. Matt blessed his luck that they didn't hit a hole or rut in the ground as they crossed the softer earth coming around behind the inn. The horses could easily have tripped and broken a leg, throwing all of them into disaster. The back of the inn was silent, and Matt reined in. Tom leaped from his horse, his agility defying his earlier complaints about his age. He took up position, watching the side of the building to see that they weren't followed. Harnan, Matt said, thrusting his spear toward the stables. Get the women's horses out and ready them. Saddle them if you can, but be ready to go without those if we have to.
Gone before
Night
sundown.
willing, we won't have to ride far, just a mile or so to get out of the village and away from this insanity. Harnan saluted in the darkness, then dismounted and dashed over to the stables. Matt waited long enough to determine that nobody was going to jump out at him from the darkness, then spoke to DeLarn, still held in front of him. "You still conscious?" DeLarn nodded weakly. "Yes, Matt, but I've taken a gut wound. We'll get the Aes Sedai," Matt said. "All you need to do is sit right here. Stay in the saddle, all right?" DeLarn nodded again. Matt hesitated at the weakness in the man's motions, but DeLarn took Pip's reins and seemed determined. So Matt slid out of the saddle, holding his Ashandarai at the ready. "Matt," DeLarn said from the saddle. Matt turned back. "Thank you for coming back for me." "I wasn't going to leave a man to that," Matt said, shivering. "Dying on the battlefield is one thing, but to die out there in that darkness? Well, I wasn't going to let it happen. Talmanis, see if you can find some light." "Working on it," the Karianan said from beside the inn's back door. He had found a lantern hanging there. A few strikes of flint and steel later, and a small, soft glow lit the backyard of the inn. Talmanis quickly closed the shield, keeping the light mostly hidden. Tom trotted back to them. "No one following, Matt," he said. Matt nodded. By the lantern light, he could see that DeLarn was in bad shape. Not just the gut wound, but scrapes across his face, rips in his uniform, one eye swollen shut. Matt whipped out a handkerchief and pressed it against the gut wound, standing beside Pips and reaching up to the man in the saddle. "Hold this tight. How'd the wound happen? They don't use weapons." "One got my own sword away from me," DeLarn said with a grunt. "He used it well enough once he had it." Talmanis had opened the back door of the inn. He looked to Matt and nodded. The way inside was clear. "We'll be back soon," Matt promised DeLarn. Holding his Ashandarai in a loose grip, he crossed the short distance to the door and nodded to Talmanis and Tom. The three of them ducked inside. The door led to the kitchens. Matt scanned the dark room and Talmanis nudged him, pointing at several lumps on the floor. The sliver of lantern light revealed a pair of kitchen boys, barely 10 years old, dead on the ground, their necks twisted. Matt glanced away, steeling himself, and inched into the room. Light. Only lads, and now dead by this insanity. Tom shook his head grimly, and the three of them crept forward. They found the cook in the next hallway, grunting as he beat on the head of what appeared to be the innkeeper. It was a man in a white apron, at least. He was already dead. The fat cook turned toward Matt and Talmanis the moment they entered the hallway, feral rage in his eyes. Matt reluctantly struck, silencing him before he could howl and bring more people against them. "There's fighting on the stairs," Talmanis said, nodding forward. "I'll bet there's a servant's stairwell," Tom noted. "This looks like a nice enough place for it." Sure enough, by cutting through two hallways in the back, they found a narrow, rickety stairwell leading up into darkness. Matt took a deep breath, then started up the stairs, holding his Ashandarai at the ready. The inn was only 2 stories high, and the flashes had been coming from the second floor near the front. They entered the second floor, pushing open the door to the acrid scent of burned flesh. The hallways here were of wood, the grain obscured by thick white paint. The floor lay under a deep chestnut carpet. Matt nodded to Talmanis and Tom, and weapons at ready, they burst out of the stairwell and into the hallway. Immediately, a ball of fire whooshed in their direction. Matt cursed, throwing himself backward and into Talmanis, narrowly avoiding the fire. Tom flattened himself with a Gleeman's agility, getting under the fire. Matt and Talmanis almost tumbled back down the stairs. "Bloody ashes!" Matt yelled into the hallway. "What do you think you're doing?" There was silence, followed finally by Jolene's voice. "Cawthon?" she called. "Who do you bloody think it is?" he shouted back. "I don't know," she said. "You came around so quickly, weapons out. Are you trying to get killed?" "We're trying to rescue you," Matt yelled. "Do we look like we need rescuing?" came the response. "Well, you're still here, aren't you?" Matt called back. That was met with silence. "Oh, for light's sake," Jolene finally called back. "Will you come out here?" "You're not going to throw another fireball at me, are you?" Matt muttered, stepping out into the hallway as Tom climbed to his feet, Talmanis following. He found the 3 Aes Sedai standing at the head of the wide, handsome stairs at the other end of the hallway. Teslin and Edicina continued to throw fireballs down at unseen villagers below, their hair wet, their dresses disheveled as if they'd been donned hastily. Jolene wore only an enveloping white dressing robe, her pretty face calm, her dark hair slick and wet and hanging down over the front of her right shoulder. The robe was parted slightly at the top, giving a hint of what hid inside. Talmanis whistled softly. "She's not a woman, Talmanis," Matt whispered warningly. "She's an Aes Sedai. Don't think of her as a woman." "I'm trying, Matt," Talmanis said, "but it's hard." He hesitated, then added, "Burn me." "Be careful or she will," Matt said, tugging his hat down slightly in the front. "In fact, she nearly did that just a moment ago." Talmanis sighed, and the three of them crossed the hallway to the women. Jolene's two warders, who had their weapons out, stood just inside the bathing chamber. A dozen or so servants were tied up in the corner. A pair of young girls, probably bathing attendants, and several men in vests and trousers. Apparently, Jolene's dress had been cut to strips and used for bonds. The silk would work far better than wool towels. Near the top of the stairs, just below the Aes Sedai, Matt could barely make out a cluster of corpses that had fallen to swords, not fire. Jolene eyed Matt as he approached, a look implying that she considered all this to be his fault somehow. She folded her arms, closing up the top of the robe, though he wasn't sure if that was because of Talmanis' gawking or if the move was coincidental. "We need to move," Matt told the women. "The whole city has gone mad." "We can't go," Jolene said. "Not and leave these servants to the mob. Besides, we need to find Master Tobrad and make certain he is safe." "Master Tobrad is the innkeeper?" Matt asked. A fireball whooshed down the stairs. "Yes," Jolene said. "Too late," Matt said. "His brains are already decorating the walls downstairs. Look, like I said, the entire village is crazy. Those servants tried to kill you, didn't they?" Jolene hesitated. "Yes." "Leave them," Matt said. "We can't do anything for them." "But if we wait until dawn," Jolene said hesitantly. "And what?" Matt said. "Burn to ash every person who tries to climb those stairs? You're making a ruckus here and it's drawing more and more people. You're going to have to kill them all to stop them." Jolene glanced at the other two women. "Look," Matt said. "I have a wounded Red Arm down below and I intend to get him out of this alive. You can't do any good for these people here. I suspect your warders had to kill that group at the top of the stairs before you all felt threatened enough to use the power. You know how determined they are." "All right," Jolene said. "I'll come. But we're bringing the two serving girls. Blerick and Finn can carry them." Matt sighed. He'd have liked the warders' blades free to help in case they ran into trouble, but said nothing more. He nodded to Talmanis and Tom, and waited impatiently as the warders picked up the two bound serving girls and slung them over shoulders. After that, the whole group hustled back down the servants' stairwell, Talmanis leading and Matt at the rear. He could hear screams that sounded half angry, half joyous, as the villagers at the base of the stairs realized no more fire would fall. There were thumps and shouts, followed by doors opening, and Matt cringed, imagining the other servants, left tied up in the bathing chamber, falling to the crowd. Matt and the others burst out into the backyard of the inn, only to find Delarn on the ground beside Pips. Arnon knelt beside him, and the bearded soldier looked up with anxiety. "Matt," he said, "he fell from the saddle. Edicina cut him off, rushing over and kneeling beside Delarn. She closed her eyes, and Matt felt a chill from his medallion. It made him shiver as he imagined the one power leaking out of her and into the man. That was almost as bad as dying. Bloody ashes, but it was. He gripped the medallion beneath his shirt. Delarn stiffened, but then gasped, eyes fluttering open. "It is done," Edicina said, standing up. "He will be weak from the healing, but I reached him in time." Arnon had gathered and saddled all of their horses, like, bless him, good man. The women mounted and spared several glances over their shoulders at the inn. "It's as if the darkness itself intoxicates them," Tom said, while Matt helped Delarn into his saddle. "As if light itself has forsaken them." leaving them only to the shadow. Nothing we can do, Matt said, throwing himself into his saddle behind Alarn. The soldier was too weak to ride on his own after that healing. Matt eyed the serving girls that the warders had slung over the fronts of their horses. They struggled against their bonds, hate in their eyes. He turned and nodded to Tilmanis, who had affixed the lantern to a saddle pole. The Carianan opened the shield, bathing the inn's stable yard in light. A path led northward out of the yard into the dark, away from the army, but also directly out of the village toward the hills. That was good enough for Matt. Ride, he said, kicking Pips into motion. The group fell in beside him. I told you we should leave, Tilmanis noted, looking over his shoulder, riding at Matt's left. But you had to stay for one more toss. Matt didn't look back. Not my fault, Tilmanis. How was I to know that staying would cause them all to start tearing each other's throats out? What? Tilmanis asked, glancing at him. Isn't this usually how people react when you tell them you're going to spend the night? Matt rolled his eyes, but didn't feel much like laughing as he led the group out of the village. Hours later, Matt sat on a rock outcropping on a dark hillside looking down at Hinder's Tap. The village was dark. Not a light burned. It was impossible to tell what was going on, but still he watched. How could a man sleep after what they'd been through? Well, the soldiers did sleep. He didn't blame Delarn. An Aes Sedai healing could drain a man. Matt had felt that icy chill himself on occasion, and he didn't intend to repeat the experience. Tilmanis and Harnan hadn't the excuse of a healing, but they were soldiers. Soldiers learned to sleep when they could, and the night's experience didn't seem to have disturbed them nearly as much as it had Matt. Oh, they'd been worried while in the thick of it, but now it was just another battle past, another battle survived. That had led Stout Harnan to joking and smiling as they bedded down. Not Matt. There was an odd wrongness about the entire experience. Was the curfew intended to keep this from happening somehow? Had Matt, by staying, caused
Oh, damn,
all
that's
of these
crazy
deaths?
fire. That's cold.
Bloody ashes. Did no place in the world make sense anymore? Matt, lad, Tom said, joining him, walking with his familiar limp. He'd had a fractured arm, though he hadn't mentioned it until Edicina had noticed him flinching and insisted on healing him. You should sleep. Now that the moon had risen, hidden behind the clouds, there was enough light for Matt to see Tom's concern. The group had stopped in a small hollow off one side of the trail. It gave a good view back toward the village, and, more importantly, it overlooked the path that Matt and the others had used to escape. The hollow lay on a steep hillside, the only approach from below. One person on watch could keep a good eye out for anyone trying to sneak into the camp. The Aes Sedai had bedded down near the back of the hollow, though Matt didn't think they were actually sleeping. Jolene's warders had thought to bring bedrolls just in case. Warders were like that. Matt's men only had their cloaks, but that hadn't deterred them from sleeping. Tilmanis was even snoring softly, despite the spring chill. Matt had forbidden a fire. It wasn't so cold that they needed one, and it would just signal anyone looking for them. I'm fine, Tom, Matt said, making room on his rock as the Gleeman settled down. You're the one who should get some sleep. Tom shook his head. One nice thing I've noticed about getting older is that your body doesn't seem to need its sleep as much anymore. Dying doesn't take as much energy as growing, I guess. Don't start that again, Matt said. Do I need to remind you about how you hauled my skinny backside out of trouble back there? What was that you were worried about earlier? That I didn't need you anymore? If you hadn't been with me today, if you hadn't come looking for me, I'd be dead in that village.
I'll be
Delarn,
right
too.
back in there. Well, light number
Tom
3.
grinned, eyes bright in the moonlight. All right, Matt, he said. No more, I promise. Matt nodded. The two of them sat for a time on their rock, looking out at the city. It's not going to leave me alone, Tom, Matt finally said. What? All of this, Matt said tiredly. The bloody Dark One and his spawn. They've been chasing me since that night in the Two Rivers, and nothing has stopped them. Do you think this was him? What else could it have been? Matt asked. Quiet village folk turning into violent madmen? It's the Dark One's own work, and you know it. Tom was silent. Yes, he finally said. I suppose it is at that. They're still coming for me, Matt said angrily. That bloody golem is out there, I know it is. But that's just part of it. Murdroll and dark friends, monsters and ghosts, chasing me and hunting me. I've stumbled from one disaster to another, barely keeping my neck above water ever since this began. I keep saying I just need to find a hole somewhere to dice and drink, but that won't stop it. Nothing will. You're too beeren, lad, Tom said. I didn't ask to be. Burn me, I wish they'd all just go bother Rand. He likes it. He shook his head, dispelling the image that formed, showing Rand asleep in his bed, men curled up beside him. You really think that? Tom asked. Matt hesitated. I wish I did, he admitted. It would make things easier. Lies never make things easier in the long run, unless they're to exactly the right person, usually a woman, at exactly the right time. When you tell them to yourself, you just bring more trouble. I brought those people trouble, in the village. He glanced toward the back of the camp, where the two warriors sat, guarding the still-bound serving girls. They continued to struggle. Light. Where did they get the strength? It was inhuman. I don't think this was you, Matt, Tom said thoughtfully. Oh, I don't disagree that trouble haunts you. The Dark One himself seems to do so. But Hinder's tap. Well, when I was singing in that common room, I heard some tidbits. They seemed like nothing, but looking back, it strikes me that the people were expecting this, or something like it. How could they have been? Matt said. If this had happened before, they'd all be dead. Don't know, Tom said thoughtfully. Then something seemed to strike him. He began fishing inside his cloak. Oh, I forgot. Maybe there is some connection between you and what happened. I managed to take this away from a man who was too drunk for his own good. The Gleeman pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to Matt. Matt took the paper, frowning, and unfolded it. He squinted in the diffuse moonlight, leaning close, and grunted when he made out what the paper contained. Not words, but a very accurate drawing of Matt's face, hat atop his head. It even had the fox-head medallion drawn in around his neck. Bloody ashes. He contained his annoyance. Handsome fellow, good nose, straight teeth, dashing hat. Tom snorted. I saw some men showing a paper to the mayor, Matt said, refolding the drawing. I didn't see what was on it, but I'll bet it was the same as this. What did the man you took this from say about it? An Outlander woman in some village north of here is giving them out and offering a reward to anyone who has seen you. The man got the paper from a friend, so he didn't have a description of her or the town's name. Either his friend kept him ignorant, wanting the reward for himself, or he was just too drunk to remember. Matt tucked the paper into his coat pocket. The light of false dawn was beginning to glow to the east. He'd sat up all night, but he didn't feel tired. Just drained. I'm going back, he said. What? Tom asked, surprised. To Hinder's tap. Matt nodded, rising. As soon as it's light. I need to... A muffled curse interrupted him. He spun, reaching for his Ashandarai. Tom had a pair of knives in his hands in the blink of an eye. Fen, Jolene's Saldean warder, was the one who had cursed. He stood, hand on his sword, searching the ground around him. Blerick stood by the Aes Sedai, sword out, alert and on guard. What? Matt asked tersely. But prisoners, Fen said. Matt started, realizing that the lumps that had lain near the waters were gone. He dashed over, cursing. Talmanos's snores stopped as the sounds woke him, and he sat up. The bonds made from strips of Jolene's dress lay on the ground, but the serving girls were gone. "What happened?" Matt asked, looking up. The dark-haired warder looked dumbfounded. "I have no idea. They were here just a moment ago." "Did you doze off?" Matt demanded. "Fen wouldn't have done such a thing," Jolene said, sitting up in her bedroll, her voice calm. She still wore only that dressing robe. "Lad," Tom said, "we both saw those girls here barely a minute ago." Talmanis cursed and woke the two Red Arms. DeLorme was looking a great deal better. His weakness from the healing barely seemed to bother him as he climbed to his feet. The warders called for a search, but Matt just turned back to the village below. "The answers are there," Matt said. "Tom, you're with me. Talmanis, watch the women." "We have little need of being watched, Matrim," Jolene said grumpily. "Fine," he snapped. "Tom, you're with me. Jolene, you watch the soldiers. Either way, you all stay here. I can't worry about a whole group right now." He didn't give them a chance to argue. Within minutes, Matt and Tom were on their horses, riding down the path back toward Hinderstadt. "Lad," Tom said, "what is it you expect to find?" "I don't know," Matt replied. "If I did, I wouldn't be so keen to look." "Fair enough," Tom said softly. Matt spotted the oddities almost immediately. Those goats out on the western pasture. He couldn't tell for certain in the dawn light, but it looked like someone was herding them. And were those lights winking on in the village? There hadn't been a single one of those all night long. He hastened Pip's pace, Tom following silently.
Oh, yeah.
It took the better part of an hour to arrive. Matt hadn't wanted to risk camping too close, though he'd also been disinclined to hunt away around and back to the army in the dark. It was fully light, if still very early, by the time they rode back into the inn's yard. A couple of men in dun coats were working on the back door, which had apparently been broken off its hinges sometime after Matt and the others left. The men looked up as Matt and Tom rode into the yard, and one of them pulled off his cap, looking anxious. Neither one made a threatening move. Matt slowed Pips to a halt. One of the men whispered to the other, who ran inside. A moment later, a balding man with a white apron stepped out through the doorway.
Number 2.
Matt felt himself go pale. "The innkeeper," Matt said. "Burn me, I saw you dead." "Best go get the mayor, son," the innkeeper said to one of the working men. He glanced back at Matt. "Quickly." "What in the bloody name of Hawkwing's left hand is going on here?" Matt demanded. "Was it all some kind of twisted show? You—" A head stuck out of the inn door, peeking around the innkeeper toward Matt. The pudgy face had curly blonde hair. Last time he'd seen this man, the cook, Matt had been forced to gut the man and slit his throat. "You," he said, pointing. "I killed you." "Calm down now, son," the innkeeper said. "Come in. We'll get you some tea and—" "I'm not going anywhere with you, spirit," Matt said. "Tom, you seeing this?" The gleeman rubbed his chin. "Perhaps we should hear the man out, Matt." "Ghosts and spirits," Matt muttered, turning Pips. "Come on." He urged Pips forward, charging around to the front of the inn, Tom following. Here he caught a glimpse of many workers inside, carrying buckets of white paint, to fix the places where Aes Sedai fire had scorched the building, likely. Tom pulled up beside Matt. "I've never seen anything like this, Matt," he said. "Why would spirits need to paint walls and repair doors?" Matt shook his head. He'd spotted the place where he'd fought the villagers to save DeLorme. He pulled Pips to a halt suddenly, making Tom curse and round his own mount around to come back. "What?"
I'll be right back.
Tom asked. Matt pointed. There was a stain of blood on the ground and across several rocks beside the road. "Where they stabbed DeLorme," he said. "All right," Tom said. Around them, men passed on the street, gazes averted. They gave Matt and Tom a wide berth. "Blood and bloody ashes," Matt thought. I've gotten us surrounded again. What if they attack? Bloody fool. So there's blood, Tom said. What did you expect? Where's the rest of the blood, Tom? Matt growled. I killed a good dozen men here and I saw them bleed. You dropped 3 with your knives. Where's the blood? It vanishes, a voice said. Matt spun pips to find the burly, hairy-armed mayor standing on the road a short distance away. He must have been near already. There was no way the workers could have fetched him that quickly. Of course, the way things seemed to be going in this village, who could tell that for certain? Barlden wore a cloak and shirt with several fresh rips in them. The blood vanishes, he said, sounding exhausted. None of us have seen it. We just wake up, and it's gone. Matt hesitated.
A little
looking around the
smoky in
village.
here.
Women peeked out of houses, holding children. Men left for the fields, carrying crooks or hoes. Save for the air of anxiety at Matt and Tom's presence, one would never know anything had gone wrong in the village. We won't hurt you, the mayor said, turning away from Matt. So you needn't look so worried. At least, not until the sun sets. I'll give you an explanation if you want one. Either come and listen or be gone with you. I don't really care so long as you stop disturbing my town. We've work to do. Much more than usual, thanks to you. Matt glanced at Tom, who shrugged. It never hurts to listen, Tom said. I don't know, Matt said, eyeing Barlden. Not unless you think it could hurt to end up surrounded by crazy, homicidal mountain folk. We leave then? Matt shook his head slowly. No. Burn me, they've still got my gold. Come on. Let's see what he has to say. It started several months back, the mayor said, standing beside the window. They were in a neat yet simple sitting room in his manor. The curtains and carpet were of a soft pale green, almost the color of oxeye leaves, with light tan wood paneling. The mayor's wife had brought tea made from dried sweet berries. Matt hadn't chosen to drink any, and he had made certain to lean against the wall near the street door. His spear rested beside him. Barlden's wife was a short, brown-haired woman, faintly pudgy with a motherly air. She returned from the kitchen carrying a bowl of honey for the tea, then hesitated as she saw Matt leaning by the wall. She eyed the spear, then put the bowl on the table and retreated. What happened? Matt asked, glancing at Tom, who had also declined a seat. The old gleeman stood with arms crossed beside the door from the kitchen.
Like old pool halls used to be, or like...
He nodded to Matt.
Or even old bars.
The woman wasn't listening at the door. He'd make a motion if he heard someone approach. We aren't sure if it was something we did, or just a cruel curse by the Dark One himself, the mayor said. It was a normal day, early this year, just before the Feast of Abram. Nothing really special about it that I can remember. The weather had broken by then, though the snows hadn't come yet. A lot of us went about our normal activities the next morning, thinking nothing of it. The oddities were small, you see. A broken door here, a rip in someone's clothing they didn't remember, and the nightmares. We all shared them. Nightmares of death and killing. A few of the women started talking, and they realized that they couldn't remember turning in the previous evening. They could remember waking, safe and comfortable in their beds. But only a few remembered actually getting into bed. Those who could remember had gone to sleep early, before sunset. For the rest of us, the late evening was just a blur. He fell silent. Matt glanced at Tom, who did not respond. Matt could see in those blue eyes of his that he was memorizing the tale. He'd better get it right if he puts me in any ballots, Matt thought, folding his arms. And he'd better include my hat. This is a good bloody hat. I was in the pastures that night, the mayor continued. I was helping old man Garkin with a broken strip of fencing. And then, nothing. A fuzzing. I woke the next morning in my own bed next to my wife. We felt tired, as if we hadn't slept well. He stopped. Then more softly he added, "And I had the nightmares. They're vague and they fade, but I can remember one vivid image. Old man Garkin dead at my feet, killed as if by a wild beast."
Open this a little bit.
Baldwin stood next to a window in the eastern wall opposite Matt, staring out. "But I went to see Garkin the next day and he was fine. We finished fixing the fencing. It wasn't until I got back to town that I heard the chattering. The shared nightmares, the missing hours just after sunset. We gathered, talking it through, and then it happened again. The sun set, and when it rose, I woke up in bed again, tired, mind full of nightmares." He shivered, then walked over to the table and poured himself a cup of tea. "We don't know what happens at night," the mayor said, stirring in a spoonful of honey. "You don't know?" Matt demanded. "I can bloody tell you what happens at night. We don't know what happens," the mayor interrupted, looking up sharply. "And have no care to know." "But we have no need to know, Outlander," the mayor said harshly. "We want to live our lives as best we can. Many of us turn in early, lying down before sunset. There are no holes in our memories that way. We go to bed, we wake up in that same bed. There are nightmares, perhaps some damage to the house, but nothing that can't be fixed. Others prefer to visit a tavern and drink to the setting of the sun. There's a blessing in that, I suppose. Drink all you want and you never have to worry about getting home. You always wake safe and sound in bed." "You can't avoid this entirely," Tom said softly. "You can't pretend nothing is different." "We don't." Baldwin took a drink of tea. "We have the rules. Rules that you ignored. No fires lit after sunset. We can't have a blaze starting in the night without anyone to fight it. And we forbid outsiders inside the town after sunset. We learned that lesson quickly. The first people trapped here after nightfall were relatives of Samri, the cooper. We found blood on the walls of his home the next morning. But his sister and her family were safely asleep in the beds he'd given them." The mayor paused. "Now they have the same nightmares we do." "So just leave," Matt said. "Leave this bloody place and go somewhere else." "We've tried," the mayor said. "We always wake up back here no matter how far we go. Some have tried ending their lives. We buried the bodies. They woke up the next morning in their beds." The room fell silent. "Blood and bloody ashes," Matt whispered. He felt chilled. "You survived the night," the mayor said, stirring his tea again. "I assumed that you hadn't after seeing that blood stain. We were curious to see where you'd wake up. Most of the rooms in the inns are permanently taken by travelers who are now, for better or worse, part of our village. We aren't able to choose where someone awakens. It just happens. An empty bed gets a new occupant, and from then on they wake up there each morning. Anyway, when I heard you talking to one another about what you'd seen, I realized that you must have escaped. You remember the night too vividly. Anyone who joins us simply has the nightmares. Count yourselves lucky. I suggest you move on and forget Hinderstap." "We have Aes Sedai with us," Tom said. "They might be able to do something to help you. We could tell the White Tower, have them send—" "No," Baldwin said sharply. "Our lives aren't so bad now that we know how to deal with our situation. We don't want Aes Sedai eyes on us." He turned away. "We nearly turned your group away flat. We do that sometimes, if we sense that the travelers won't obey our rules. But you had Aes Sedai with you. They ask questions. They get curious. We worried that if we turned you away, they'd get suspicious and force entrance." "Forcing them to leave at sunset made them even more curious," Matt said. And having their bathing attendants bloody try to kill them isn't a good way to keep the secret either. The mayor looked wan. Some wished, well, that you'd be trapped here. They thought that if Aes Sedai were bound here, they'd find a way out for all of us. We don't all agree. Either way, it's our problem. Please, just go. Fine. Matt stood up straight and picked up his spear. But first, tell me where these came from. He pulled the paper from his pocket, the one that bore a drawing of his face. Barlden glanced at it. You'll find those spread around the nearby villages, he said. Someone's looking for you. As I told Ledrin last night, I'm not in the business of selling out guests. I wasn't about to kidnap you and risk keeping you here overnight just for some reward. Who's looking for me? Matt repeated. About 20 leagues to the northeast, there's a small town called Trustair. Rumor says that if you want a little coin, you can bring news about a man who looks like the one in this picture. Or the other one. Visit an inn in Trustair called the Shaken Fist to find the one looking for you. Other picture? Matt asked, frowning. Yes, a burly fellow with a beard. A note at the bottom says he has golden eyes. Matt glanced at Tom, who'd raised a bushy eyebrow. Blood and bloody ashes, Matt muttered, and pulled the side of his hat down. Who was looking for him and Perrin, and what did they want? We'll be going, I suppose, he said. He glanced at Barlden. Poor fellow. That went for the entire village. But what was Matt to do about it? There were fights you could win, and others you just had to leave for someone else. Your gold is on the wagon outside, the mayor said. We didn't take any from your winnings. The food is there too. He met Matt's eyes. We hold to our word here. Other things are out of our control, particularly for those who didn't listen to the rules. But we aren't going to rob a man just because he's an outsider. Mighty tolerant of you, Matt said flatly, pulling open the door. Have a good day, then. And when night comes, try not to kill anyone I wouldn't kill. Tom, you coming? The gleeman joined him, limping slightly from his old wound. Matt glanced back at Barlden, who stood with sleeves rolled up in the center of the room, looking down at his teacup. He seemed like he was wishing that cup held something a little stronger. Poor fellow, Matt said, then stepped out into the morning light after Tom and pulled the door shut behind him. I assume we're going after that person spreading around pictures of you? Tom asked. Right as light we are, Matt said, tying his Ashendari to Pip's saddle. It's on the way to Four Kings anyway. I'll lead your horse if you can drive the wagon. Tom nodded. He was studying the mayor's home. What? Matt asked. Nothing, lad, the gleeman said. It's just, well, it's a sad tale. Something's wrong in the world. There's a snag in the pattern here. The town unravels at night, and then the world tries to reset it each morning to make things right again. Well, they should be more forthcoming, Matt said. The villagers had pulled the food-filled wagon up while Matt and Tom had been chatting with the mayor. It was hitched to two strong draft horses, tan of coloring and wide of hoof. More forthcoming, Tom asked. How? The mayor is right. They did try to warn us. Matt grunted, walking over to open the chest and check on his gold. It was there, as the mayor had said. I don't know, he said. They could put up a warning sign or something. Hello, welcome to Hinder's Tap. We will murder you in the night and eat your bloody face if you stay past sunset. Try the pies. Martina Bailey makes them fresh daily. Tom didn't chuckle. Poor taste, lad. There's too much tragedy in this town for levity. Funny, Matt said. He counted out about as much gold as he figured would be a good price for the food in the wagon. Then, after a moment, he added 10 more silver crowns. He set all of this in a pile on the mayor's doorstep, then closed the chest. The more tragic things get, the more I feel like laughing. Are we really going to take this wagon? We need the food, Matt said, lashing the chest to the back of the wagon. Several large wheels of white cheese and a half-dozen legs of mutton lay prominently alongside the casks of ale. The food smelled good, and his stomach rumbled. I won it fair. He glanced at the villagers passing on the street. When he'd first seen them the day before, he'd thought the slowness of their pace was due to the lazy nature of the mountain villagers. Now it struck him that there was another reason entirely. He turned back to his work, checking the horse's harness. And I don't feel a bit bad taking the wagon and horses. I doubt these villagers are going to be doing much traveling in the future. Chapter 29. Into Bandar Eben. Moraine Demotret, who died because of my weakness. Rand slowed Tadaishar to a walk as he passed through the massive gateway to Bandar Eben, his entourage following, ranks of Aiel leading him. The gates were said to be carved with the city's seal, but swung open as they were, Rand couldn't see them. The nameless Darkfriend I beheaded in those Mirandian hills. I've forgotten the looks of the others with her, but I will never forget her face. The list ran through his head. Almost a daily ritual now. The name of every woman who had died by his hand or because of his actions. The street inside the city was of packed earth, lined with ruts that crisscrossed at the intersections. The dirt was lighter here than he was used to. Colover Saigon, who died because I made her a pauper. He rode past ranks of Domani, women in diaphanous gowns, men with thin mustaches and colorful coats. The roadways here had wooden boardwalks at the sides, and the people crowded them watching. Rand could hear banners and flags flapping in the wind. There seemed to be a lot of them in the city. The list always began with Moraine. That name hurt the most of all, for he could have saved her. He should have. He hated himself for allowing her to sacrifice herself for him. A child stepped off the boardwalk and started to run out into the street, but his father caught him by the hand and hauled him back into the press of people. Some coughed and muttered, but most were silent. The sounds of Rand's troops marching on the packed earth seemed a thunder by comparison.
All right, everyone. I'm going to call into this life for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who continues to stop by. I appreciate all y'all's support. Excuse me. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.